Well, group number 5, it's literature time. And actually, we're going to take a break from the book today. We're going to do something different. We're going to start throughout the year, I should say, we are going to be looking at some poetry. So, let me erase this. So, go ahead and get out your page right here. It says poetry. It's nice and orange. You know, it's a little bit different. It is Class 5, Literature 11. So, we're going to look at poetry. What is, first of all, how many of you enjoy poetry? Raise your hand. Anybody? Jonathan, you like some poetry? Pierre? Luis? You guys like poetry? Christina? Poetry? Anybody? I like it. It's good. Let's see. So, but we have to ask ourselves, what is poetry? And so if we want to ask ourselves what something is, where do we refer to? Who knows that one? Yes, that's correct. We go to the Webster's 1828 dictionary. The very best. It is the best. All right, so poetry. We're going to define what poetry is. It's a very simple definition. It's not hard, not complex, not long. So, poetry. It is the art or practice of composing in verse. The art or practice of composing in verse. So that's what poetry is. It's the art or practice of composing in verse. Now, so for example, roses are red, violets are blue. I have black socks. How about you? That's composing in verse, something in verse. Oh, let me make sure. Okay, all of that, there we go. Poetry. So go ahead and write it down. Pause if you need to. The art or practice composing in verse. And what we write when you are writing in poetry, you are composing what we call a poem. Anybody ever written any poetry, any poem in verse? One of the great ones of doing this was a man named William Shakespeare. He wrote whole books in poetry. Like, he was a genius because he would keep the same, like I said, roses are red, violets are blue. I have holy socks. How about you? See how that it's in verse, it's in rhythm. He did whole stories like that. I cannot imagine doing that. It kind of hurts my brain. But when we write poetry, or we compose poems, that's what we do. Now, there are some poems that are called free verse or other types, but that's usually what we think of. And when we get to it, we'll look at some of the greatest books of poetry ever written. Because it's not just about the style of poetry, but it's more importantly about the content. So remember, it's very important. You can have really cool poetry, but horrible content. It's kind of like a really long book that's really bad. Or for example, if any of you ever watched a long movie and at the end of it, you just looked at the screen and said, I want my 2 hours back. That was bad. Like, it's just really bad. Like, there's a lot of bad movies out there. It's not that it's not the language that's bad, it's not the whatever, it's just a bad movie. The acting is bad, the story is bad, the storyline is bad, the character development is bad, it's just bad, bad, bad. And there's poetry out there that's just bad. But when you write poetry, excuse me for a moment. Sorry about that. So when you write poetry, you compose poems. So we're going to write down what the definition of a poem is. Poem. The first part says, a metrical composition. So, for example, roses are red, violets are blue. I have holy socks, how about you? You see, my voice goes in a meter or a rhythm. That's what it's talking about when it says a metrical composition, something that has rhythm to it. It also says a composition in which the verses consist of certain measures, whether in blank verse or in rhyme. So let's write that out. A composition in which the verses, a composition in which the verses consist of certain measures. Whether in blank verse or in rhyme. So that's what a poem is. Here, I will turn the camera so you can see clearly. If you need to, pause it for a moment, copy it down, and then play it back. So that's what it is. So we got this. That's what a poem is. Now, I have on here, what are the greatest books of poetry ever written? All right? Let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, these are not in particular order, but they are what we call the greatest books of poetry. Now, where do you think they come from? Who wrote them? Or shall we say, what's the greatest book ever written? That gives you some idea, right? So, the greatest books of poetry ever written. Now, you may not think about them like this, but this is what they were in their original language. Number 1, Job. Number 2, the Psalms. Number 3, Proverbs. Number 4, and I have to look to spell this because I can't ever remember, Ecclesiastes. And then the last one is Song of Solomon. These are the greatest books of poetry ever written. Why? Because they're part of the Bible. And remember what I said earlier. It's not just about the meter. It's not just about cool rhyming. It's not just about those things. It is about the content. And content is most important. You could also probably consider, those of you who like it, rap to be poetry, in a sense. But as you know, there's a lot of bad rap. But if you want to look at content and the best of the best, you have to go with what the Bible says, because it's the best expression of poetry that we've ever had. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. So make sure you get those written down. And again, as we go throughout the year, we will look at more poetry, different types of poetry. You'll be writing your own poetry. Yes, you will. Did you know that? Josh, did you know that you're going to be writing your own poetry this year? Yes, and you'll have to say it in front of everybody at the end of the year when we do the open house. I'm just kidding. No, I wouldn't make you do that. But you will be writing your own poetry. So look forward to that and seeing how that works. Other than that, like I said, we kind of took a break today from the book, but we're getting into something different. I hope you enjoy it and have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening.